An elderly man asks for a simple sandwich at a cafe and is humiliated until the truth comes out. The cafe wasn't busy, but silence still fell like a dropped plate the moment he walked in. He wasn't particularly tall, nor striking in appearance, just an old man with silver hair neatly combed, his coat too thin for the chilly afternoon. His shoes were worn but polished. He moved slowly, with the sort of careful grace that comes from decades of discipline and hardship. In his hand was a folded bill, wrinkled from being clutched too tightly, too long. No one greeted him. No one offered a smile. He stood in line, behind a teenager in earbuds and a woman tapping impatiently on her phone. The girl behind the counter barely looked up as she waved him forward. "Next," she said, chewing gum, her eyes flickering toward her manager, who was half watching from the kitchen. He stepped forward, cleared his throat softly, and spoke with quiet dignity. "May I please have a sandwich? Just something simple. Ham, if you have it." The girl blinked, waiting. He held out the bill, a $10 note, slightly torn at the corner. She looked down, then back up at him, eyebrows raised. "That's not even enough for a ham sandwich here," she said, not trying to be kind about it. The woman behind him gave an audible sigh. The teenager popped his gum and smirked. I see," he said gently, lowering the bill. "Yeah," the girl said, turning slightly to the side to stack cups. "This is a specialty cafe. You want a deli down the block or something? We don't do, like, basic ham." He didn't move, didn't argue, just nodded with a flicker of something behind his eyes, a glint of resignation. Or maybe something deeper. "I understand," he said. "Thank you for your time." He began to turn away. "Seriously, who walks in here asking for a basic ham sandwich?" The girl mumbled, not quietly enough. Someone at a nearby table snorted into their latte. And just like that, the old man became the punchline. He stopped mid-step, then slowly turned around. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice calm. "May I ask your name?" The girl rolled her eyes. "Kayla." "What?" He nodded thoughtfully, as if tucking it away in some long-forgotten drawer of memory. "Thank you, Kayla. I won't forget that." "Okay, that's kinda weird," she said, glancing back at her manager, who now looked up with interest. The old man stepped aside and sat at an empty table in the corner, placing the $10 bill in front of him like an offering to no one. He didn't speak again. He just waited. An hour passed. Customers came and went. Laughter, orders shouted, espresso machines hissing. He was still there. No food, no drink, just waiting. Some began whispering. Was he homeless? Delusional? Dangerous? When the manager finally approached, she did so cautiously. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you're not a paying customer." He looked up slowly. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired but clear. "Of course," he said. "I was only waiting for someone." "Who?" The door opened with a chime before he could answer. In walked a woman in a crisp gray suit, flanked by two men in dark uniforms. Their badges glinted. Kayla straightened behind the counter. The laughter stopped. The woman walked directly to the old man and smiled. "Colonel Whitmore," she said warmly. "Forgive the delay." He stood, nodding politely. "No trouble at all, Ms. Lynn." They shook hands. And then the air changed. Ms. Lynn turned to the room. "Everyone, may I have your attention, please?" People looked up, confused. "This gentleman," she said, gesturing to the old man, "is retired Colonel James Whitmore, recipient of the Medal of Honor, 2 Silver Stars, and former advisor to 3 presidents. He's here today because he declined a private lunch with the mayor to honor a promise made 50 years ago." Murmurs spread like fire. She turned back to him. "Shall we sit?" He nodded. "Yes, but may I ask one thing first?" "Of course." He turned to Kayla behind the counter. "May I please have that simple sandwich now?" Kayla looked stricken. The manager nodded quickly. Yes, of course. Right away." She scurried to the back. The sound of bread slicing had never felt so loud. When she returned with a carefully made ham sandwich, placed respectfully on a ceramic plate, Her hands trembled. He thanked her, accepted it, and sat down with Ms. Lin and the uniformed men. No one spoke. No one laughed. They talked for half an hour, softly, while the rest of the cafe watched in uneasy silence. Then Colonel Whitmore stood and turned once more to Kayla. I was 23 when I made a promise to a man dying in my arms. He was from this town. He asked me to visit this cafe one day, 50 years later, and have a simple ham sandwich in his honor. No press, no cameras, just the sandwich. His voice didn't waver, but everyone listening held their breath. I've been to 5 continents, seen wars, peace treaties, mistakes I'll carry to my grave. But I never forget a promise, even the small ones. He looked around the cafe, his gaze settling on faces now pale with shame. Never forget that dignity does not wear a suit or carry a platinum card. Sometimes it walks in with worn shoes and a $10 bill. He left the sandwich half-eaten, left the bill on the table, and walked out. Outside, the sun had begun to set. He paused, breathing in the crisp air. Not angry, not bitter, just steady. A quiet man keeping a quiet promise. And inside that cafe, something shifted. The girl who'd sneered now stared at the sandwich like it might tell her how to be better. The manager whispered something to a barista and wiped her eyes when she thought no one could see. And every customer there suddenly wondered how many faces they'd looked through that week. How many quiet heroes they'd mocked without knowing. The door closed gently behind him. He disappeared down the street like smoke on the wind. But the story, the real one, had only just begun. The silence in the cafe lingered long after Colonel Whitmore had gone. Conversations had stilled, laughter had died, and the weight of unspoken shame hung in the air like fog on a battlefield. Kayla stood behind the counter, her hands still resting on the register, though no one was ordering anything. Her mouth was slightly open, but no words came. She was replaying the entire exchange over and over in her mind, his voice, his calm, the quiet power he carried without ever raising it. I didn't know, she whispered to no one in particular. The manager, Claire, approached slowly. None of us did. But that wasn't a defense. A young man in his 20s, beanie pulled low, a skateboard propped beside his chair, stood up and approached the table where the sandwich sat, untouched on one side. He stared at the $10 bill. It was old and worn, but laid out perfectly, like a tribute. He didn't take his change, the guy said. Claire shook her head. He didn't want change. That wasn't why he came. Another customer, a middle-aged woman in a navy cardigan, got up next. He said he made a promise to a man dying in his arms. And all we gave him was mockery. She looked around. He could have had a press conference, a medal ceremony, but he came here for a sandwich. One by one, customers began gathering near the table. No one touched it. It felt sacred somehow, that plate and that bill. And slowly, the energy in the room began to shift, not toward spectacle, but toward reflection. A few moments later, a small boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Daddy, what's the Medal of Honor?" His father knelt down beside him and said softly, "It means someone did something incredibly brave, even when they were scared, even when it would have been easier not to." The boy looked at the half-eaten sandwich. Did he save people? The father nodded. Yes. And today, he taught all of us something too. Across the street, Colonel Whitmore paused at a bench just outside a small bookstore. He sat with care, resting his hands on his knees, and looked out at the cafe. He didn't feel triumphant. He wasn't interested in teaching lessons through shame. But he had made a promise. It was 1975 when he held Corporal Henry Sloan in his arms. They'd been caught in an ambush along the ridge. Whitmore had dragged him from the wreckage, bullets whizzing by like wasps. Henry was from this town. Talked about it all the time. The cafe, the bookstore, the street lamp that flickered on Main. He was just 19 when he died. "I just want to go home," Henry had whispered, blood on his lips. "Sit in that cafe. Have a ham sandwich. One more time. I'll do it for you," Whitmore had said, voice shaking. "You have my word." That word had stayed with him. Through more deployments, marriages, mistakes, regrets. Through funerals and medals and long stretches of silence. It had whispered in his ear on lonely nights, "Remember me." Back inside the cafe, Claire gathered the staff. "I need all of you to hear this," she said. Her voice was firm, but quiet. "We're not just a business. We are a space where people walk in with stories. Some are louder than others. Some are dressed up in gold watches, and some come in on worn soles. But every one of them matters." Kayla looked down. "I failed today," Claire continued. "I didn't stop what I heard. I didn't speak up when it mattered. That ends now." She turned to Kayla. "You have potential. I've seen it. But you've got to decide the kind of person you want to be. Not just when it's easy." Tears welled in Kayla's eyes. "I want to make it right. You can't fix today, but you can choose who you are tomorrow." Kayla nodded. "I want to start by giving him his change back." Claire raised an eyebrow. "You think he wants $10? "No," Kayla said softly. "But I want to honor it." Meanwhile, a reporter from the local paper, who'd been sipping coffee quietly in the back corner, now stared at his open notebook with a mix of awe and guilt. He hadn't planned to write anything today, just stopped in for caffeine before his next assignment. But now, he began to write furiously. "Retired colonel teaches town a quiet lesson in dignity and memory." It was going to be front page. At the bookstore bench, Colonel Whitmore was joined by Ms. Lynn again, who had stepped away from her car. "I hope I didn't overstep," she said gently. "With the introductions." He shook his head. "No, but I never wanted to be known for medals. Just for keeping promises." "You did," she said. "Better than most." He chuckled. "I think I scared the girl behind the counter half to death. She needed that." He was quiet a long moment. "It's not their fault, not really," he said. "They've never seen what it means to live with memory. They only see what's convenient." Ms. Lynn nodded. "But every generation has a moment to grow up," he continued. Maybe this was theirs. That night, the story spread online. A customer had filmed the moment Ms. Lynn introduced him and shared it to a local social group. By morning, the video had reached over 300,000 views. Veterans organizations reshared it. News anchors quoted his speech. Even a senator commented, "Dignity does not wear a suit." Wise words from a true hero. People around the country debated, had we lost our ability to see one another? How often had we dismissed the elderly as burdens instead of bridges? But for Colonel Whitmore, the world outside didn't matter much. He'd done what he came to do. He returned home to his small, tidy apartment where medals hung on the wall only because others insisted. He fed his dog, Henry, named after the boy he never forgot. And then, as he did every night, he wrote a letter. This time it read, "Dear Henry, I did it. The cafe's still there. They don't serve basic ham sandwiches anymore. Not really, but I got one anyway. They didn't know who I was. That was the point, I think. The girl at the counter reminded me a little of you, young, too sure of herself. But she learned something today. Maybe they all did. I hope I honored you well. Semper Fi, Jim." Back in the cafe, the sandwich was no longer on the table. It had been carefully wrapped and placed in a sealed box marked, "Never forget." The $10 bill lay inside too. Claire had decided it would stay there, on a shelf, next to a plaque. Customers could read the story. Staff would hear it in training. Every employee from that day still remembered. Some of them cried when they told it. Some of them stayed longer than planned, hoping to be a small part of something bigger. And Kayla, she changed the most. She started showing up early, reading about veterans, volunteering at a local home for seniors. She never forgot that moment, the look in his eyes when he asked for her name. She began asking names too, not just customers, people. The next day, Kayla returned to the cafe before dawn. The streets were still dark, painted in soft grays by the early morning mist. The cafe lights buzzed to life as she unlocked the door, her breath visible in the cold. She stepped inside and stood in the middle of the room, not to set up the counter or wipe the tables, just to be still, to listen. It was the same cafe as yesterday, but not the same her. She turned to the display shelf Claire had set up overnight. The sandwich was sealed inside a glass case, resting on a folded napkin. Beside it sat the bill, smoothed and gently pressed under a clear panel. A small bronze plaque now read, "In honor of Colonel James Whitmore, who taught us that dignity needs no introduction." Kayla stared at it for a long time. Then she went to the back, brewed a pot of coffee not for customers, but for the veterans who would be arriving soon. Claire had posted an invitation on social media the night before. Free coffee and conversation with local veterans. Come hear stories worth remembering. They didn't know who would show up, but they came. By 8 a.m., 5 elderly men and 1 woman had gathered around the big wooden table in the back, each carrying something more than their coat's memories, grief, pride. One of them wore a faded Air Force cap. Another had a patch on his jacket that read, "Charlie Company." They spoke softly at first, not quite sure what to make of the gesture. Kayla approached with a tray. "Good morning," she said. "Coffee's fresh. No charge. Thank you for being here." One of the men smiled. "You the girl from the video?" She flushed. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Takes guts to show up the next day." "I'm learning," she said. "Well," the woman among them said, "then sit down and listen. That's how learning starts." Kayla pulled up a chair. By mid-morning, the cafe buzzed not with gossip, but with quiet conversations. A high school teacher brought her civics class for a field trip. They listened while the veterans told stories of battles fought, letters written, friends lost, and how sometimes the hardest part wasn't where it was being forgotten afterward. Claire moved between tables, refilling mugs, but pausing often just to listen. Across town, Colonel Whitmore sat on a wooden bench at a park, flipping through an old photo album. Every image was a doorway, a memory, a face gone too soon. He hadn't intended to become a symbol. That's the thing about quiet men who keep their word when the world notices. It doesn't feel like honor. It feels like interruption. Still, he knew something had shifted. That sandwich wasn't just a meal. It was a reminder. By the third day, the cafe had to bring in extra chairs. A college student offered to redesign the menu chalkboard. He wrote across the top in bold white script, "Everyone has a story. Ask before you assume." Beneath that, the Whitmore sandwich appeared. Simple ham, fresh bread, no extras. All proceeds went to a local veterans' mental health fund. Kayla made the first one herself. She wrapped it carefully, placed it in the pickup window, and called out, "Order up." One promise kept. That afternoon, she received a letter. It came in a plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, written in neat cursive. "Dear Kayla, thank you for your humility, for listening, for learning. I wasn't upset at how you treated me. Disappointed, yes, but not angry. I've seen worse than rudeness. I've seen people lose their humanity under pressure. You, on the other hand, showed yours when no one asked you to. That's character. The world needs more of that. Tell your manager she runs a good place. Better now than ever. Oh, hand keep the $10. I meant for it to stay. Warmly, James Whitmore." Kayla read the letter 3 times, then pressed it gently into a frame. She hung it behind the counter where she could see it every day. Not as penance, as promise. Meanwhile, at the local community center, a group of teenagers began organizing a Day of Listening event. They reached out to veterans groups, retirement homes, and anyone who'd lived through more than they'd ever imagined. No speeches, no politics, just chairs, time, and ears willing to hear. When asked what inspired them, the organizer, a 17-year-old named Leo, simply said, "The sandwich guy. I want to be someone who sees people before judging them." Weeks passed. Winter deepened. But something in the town stayed warmer than usual. People held doors open more often. Cashiers asked names. Teens offered their seats on buses. Not because of a viral video, but because of what came after it. At the cafe, a regular began buying coffee for the person behind him every Friday. A young mother started a kindness wall for kids to leave notes of encouragement for others. A retired man who lived alone now hosted a Saturday morning chess club open to anyone who wanted to learn. The ripple was real, and it all traced back to one man, one sandwich, one moment of quiet courage. Claire, ever practical, kept her eyes on the business, but even she admitted business had never been better. But it wasn't just profit. It was presence. People lingered now. They looked each other in the eye. She stood at the counter one morning, watching Kayla joke with a little boy as she handed him a muffin shaped like a bear. The boy's grandmother, once grumpy and withdrawn, smiled warmly from the corner. Claire turned to the sandwich case where the plaque sat. "You did good, old man," she said under her breath. "You made us better." Colonel Whitmore, for his part, never returned to the cafe. He didn't need to. He knew the lesson had taken root. Instead, he traveled quietly, once to visit the grave of Henry Sloan, where he left a fresh flower and the cafe menu with Whitmore's sandwich circled in pen. Another time to a small school in Ohio, where he spoke to third graders about promises, not war. He kept writing letters, always handwritten, always signed Jim. Back in the cafe, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Kayla welcomed a customer in his late 60s who walked with a cane. "Anything I can get you, sir?" she asked. He looked around the cafe, taking in the soft jazz, the framed letter on the wall, the plaque above the sandwich case. "Just a simple ham sandwich, if you have one," he said with a warm smile. Kayla smiled right back, heart full. "Yes, sir," she said. "We do." And this time, everyone smiled with her. A side story, 10 years later. The book wasn't even supposed to be in the library. Eli found it wedged awkwardly between two thick physics manuals, its spine cracked, the cover a soft leather brown, the edges worn like it had been passed between 100 hands. The Whitmore Journal. He almost left it there. He was only in the library to dodge the rain. His math teacher had chewed him out again for being late. His foster dad barely looked at him anymore. It was one of those days where the sky felt just like everything else in his life, gray, cold, too heavy. But the title pulled at something. He sat down, opened the book, and began to read. At first, the words didn't seem special. They were quiet, uneven, just stories from a man named James Whitmore, who apparently served in the military, liked sandwiches, and once made a promise to someone who died. But a few pages in, something shifted. Some promises don't end. They echo through others, even strangers, until someone finally listens. That line made Eli pause. He flipped ahead to a section labeled February 2025. I've never forgotten the boy's name, Henry Sloan. He died believing in a home he hadn't seen in years. So I brought him a sandwich and a story. I didn't know it would change anyone but me. Eli read the entire book in one sitting. Rain turned to dusk outside. The librarian flicked the overhead lights off one by one. But Eli stayed reading, rereading, holding those words like a lifeline. Because someone had remembered a promise. Because someone cared enough to show up. The next day, he skipped school. He told no one. Just packed a backpack with some clothes, a half-eaten granola bar, and the book. Then he boarded a bus headed west. He didn't have a plan, only a folded piece of paper from the back of the book where someone had scribbled, "Claire's Cafe, home of the Whitmore sandwich. Ask for Kayla." It took 2 buses, a train, and walking 5 miles in the wrong direction before he found it. The cafe sat on a quiet corner of a tree-lined street, sunlight spilling across its windows like a memory. The air smelled like warm bread and old wood. People came and went, some with purpose, others just drifting in. Eli hesitated at the door. He was soaked with sweat. He hadn't eaten since the bus terminal. His hoodie clung to him like a damp rag. But he clutched the book tightly to his chest, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. A bell chimed overhead. No one stared. That surprised him. A woman behind the counter, mid-30s, with soft eyes and a sharp posture, looked up and smiled. "Welcome in. Grab any seat." He stood frozen. She noticed. "You okay?" He nodded quickly, then blurted out, "I'm looking for Kayla." The woman blinked, then smiled again, warmer. You found her. He took a shaky breath, pulled the book from his bag, and placed it on the counter. I think this changed me. They sat at a small table in the back, near a wall covered in handwritten notes, photographs, postcards, even crayon drawings. Kayla listened while Eli spoke in scattered pieces about the book, the rain, the library, the silence in his house that felt louder than any yelling. About how reading the Colonel's words was the first time he believed someone out there still thought promises mattered. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask him to slow down or be clearer. She just listened. When he finished, Kayla leaned back. You're not the first, she said softly. That book has traveled more than most people. Eli looked around. Did you know him? I did, she said. And he changed me too. Not by what he said, but how he lived. She reached into the drawer beneath the counter and pulled out something wrapped in paper. The Whitmore sandwich, she said. On the house. It's tradition. Eli smiled, almost shyly. He would have liked that. Kayla nodded. He would have insisted. Eli stayed 3 days. He swept the cafe floors in the mornings and helped refill napkin holders at closing. During slow hours, he read every letter on the promise wall. Some made him laugh. Some made him cry in that tight, quiet way he wasn't used to admitting. And each afternoon, Kayla would sit with him, no questions, no pressure, just presence. On the 3rd day, she handed him a journal. Blank. Leather cover. A ribbon to mark the pages. For your own words, she said. Colonel Whitmore always said stories matter more when we tell them ourselves. He wrote his first entry that night. I think I used to be invisible, but now I'm becoming someone people might remember. Not for being smart or brave, just for being here. When Eli returned home, something had changed. His foster dad didn't notice at first, but Eli spoke more, sat at the table longer, began showing up on time. And once, after dinner, he asked a question no one expected. Can I tell you about someone? He spoke about James Whitmore, about promises, sandwiches, quiet dignity. His foster dad, a man who usually nodded through conversations, grew still. Then, finally, said, I was in the Navy. It was the first time Eli had ever heard that. They sat there late into the night, trading words, then silences, then more words. A bridge had begun to form. 6 months later, Eli started a listening hour at his school. At first, no one came. But then a girl sat beside him and talked about her parents' divorce. Then a boy admitted he missed his brother who had moved away. And just like that, the wall between them all began to crack. He didn't preach. He just sat, just listened. And that was enough. 2 years passed. Eli applied for college not because anyone told him to, but because he wanted to study social work. His admissions essay wasn't about academics. It was about a man who walked into a cafe, asked for a ham sandwich, and left the world different. He ended it with the line, we all carry stories. The quiet ones often matter most. Back at the cafe, Kayla received a letter, handwritten, neatly folded. It read, Dear Kayla, you said that book had traveled far. I wanted you to know it's still going. I've passed it to another kid now. He was sitting alone at the park, looked like I used to. I didn't say much, just handed him the journal and said, This helped me once. He nodded. I hope it helps him too. Thank you for the sandwich, for the silence, for listening, still becoming. Eli. Kayla smiled, folded the letter, and pinned it to the promise wall. Right beneath it, she added a sticky note in her own handwriting. Still becoming, still echoing. And somewhere, on a shelf, in a city library far from where it all began, the original copy of the Whitmore journal waited. Spine worn, corners creased, ready for the next quiet echo.